Night goes on. Let's bring in our panel. Washington Post columnist Marc Thiessen, Marc national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and president. Mara.
Well, I can tell you the Democrats are just tearing their hair out because so many of them are hoping that Joe Biden would be the person that seems the most electable against Donald Trump. But in trying to make a point that is widely supported, which is there should be more civility and working across the aisle, he succeeded in making himself look like a relic. And that's the problem here. You know, there's been a lot of questions about whether Joe Biden could perform on the campaign trail. He's run twice before badly, and this is an example of why. He's undisciplined. He kind of just talks about, you know, the past, the distant past. There are a lot of other examples he could have used. Maybe he could have used an example from the 1990s.
Yeah, it's important to point out that the two senators he references from Mississippi and Georgia were Democrats.
Yes, yes, but
not like working across the aisle.
Issues, on issues is what he's talking about.
But go ahead.
Nobody's heard of Talmadge and in Washington. I mean, when's the last time Talmadge ever came up?
I mean,
I know,
but I know. To go back to
because he's been in Washington for 46 years. He's been. I mean, this is the problem with having a front runner.
Why not say, "Hey, I worked with Dick Lugar from Indiana, and we were great friends."
But the problem is this is what you have when you have a guy who arrived in Washington in 1972, and this is part of his frame of reference of how you work across the. But the point being is that he's a gaffe machine, and he's always been a gaffe machine, but he was making what his point wasn't. The point he was trying to make wasn't a gaffe, which is that we should be working across the aisle with people who we disagree with. He wasn't arguing for segregation; he was arguing for civility. That, I disagree with you, Mara, is a very controversial position in the Democratic Party today. Before this happened, he got slammed for saying that Mike Pence was a decent guy. No, hold on. And he had to apologize for it. Then he got slammed for saying that we should have middle ground on climate change, and he had to apologize for that. His spokesman said it. And the point is that the Democratic Party today does not want middle ground with Republicans or conservatives.
Democratic Twitter doesn't want that. But every poll of Democratic voters says they want people to compromise and work across the aisle. The Biden campaign is counting on that the Democratic Party is less of a woke-utopia than you would think on social media.
But you're going to have these other candidates looking to make up ground on a candidate who's,
Thursday.
The polls are going to town.
For all the talk that, well, we're not here to criticize other Democrats. I mean, let's be honest, this is a pit of vipers. They're going to get after it when they can. And this is a big problem for Joe Biden. Let's not underestimate this. His lead in our Real Clear Politics average right now is 17 points. His lead among African-American voters is 35 points. This is a core constituency for Biden. To the extent that this causes erosion among that group to other candidates, it's going to hurt him in a big way.
And you know who wasn't criticizing him? You know who came to his defense today? Jim Clyburn. And Hakeem Jeffries, some prominent African Americans, members of Congress.
But I guess, Tom, the big question is, can he run that race in this Democratic primary? The race that Mara's talking about, which is betting that most Democrats are not Twitter Democrats and they don't go to the extreme of the left or the progressive side. Can he win that race in this primary?
It remains to be seen. But Mara and I were talking about this in the green room. I mean, Joe Biden was never going to win the woke primary, so he's trying to run a general election campaign.
By the way, for people at home, the woke part is like the Twitter that's kind of left, progressive.
And the fact is that the progressives are driving a lot of the narrative on Twitter and other places, right? And Joe Biden may never get to the vote if the way this thing is going, if he continues to make these gaffes. I think he's going to have to apologize for this. He's going to try and have to put it behind him and short things. Absolutely.
Before Thursday.
I mean, it's going to be deadly in Miami if he doesn't deal with it.
He's got to deal with it.
The wokeness is not just on Twitter. It's very easy to say this is just a Twitter problem, and the Democratic Party is not the Twitter party.
AOC
for 40 years, Joe Biden has took a middle ground on abortion and said he supported the Hyde Amendment. He said, I'm personally pro-life, but I don't support taxpayer funding, and he was forced to capitulate on a 40-year position that is a majoritarian position in the American public, but is unacceptable in the Democratic Party today. The Democratic Party, as defined by the candidates who are running for the Democratic nomination, is not for compromise, is not for reaching across the aisle. They don't want to sit down. It's not just they're against Donald Trump. They are against working with Democrats. They want Republicans. They want the Green New Deal. They want
I don't think you can lump them all in there. Obviously, you have Amy Klobuchar. You have Michael Bennet from Colorado. You have John Delaney from Maryland.
We're doing well.
Okay. Let me go to the Trump campaign manager who talked to CBS after this campaign launch and the big rally in Orlando last night.
I think we win an electoral landslide as of today. I think the president was happy.
An electoral landslide.
I think even more electoral points than he did last time. I just think the country's too complex now just to call a couple hundred people and ask them what they think. There are so many ways and different people that are going to show up to vote now. The way turnout now works, the abilities that we have to turn out voters, it's not, the polling can't understand that. And that's why it was so wrong in 2016. It was 100% wrong. Nobody got it right.
Now, if you look at fundraising numbers, take a look at the first 24 hours here. $24.8 million. That's $14 million donated to the campaign, $10 million donated to the Trump Victory Fund. But that's more than the first 8 totals, as you see there. Biden, O'Rourke, Sanders. It's a big campaign chest, Mara, and it's going to make a big difference.
Graphic makes it sound. He has hundreds of millions of dollars and a huge head start to develop this big social media presence, to test out all sorts of messages and how to micro-target them to the right Facebook group. He has, any incumbent would have a tremendous advantage.
Let alone the PACs. I want to point this out, and this is the Q poll from Florida that we've talked about on the air, and this is that Biden is up on Trump by 9 points. This came out this week. Now, this Quinnipiac poll is the same Quinnipiac that looked at Florida for the governor's race, where they had Andrew Gillum over Ron DeSantis by 7 on Election Day, right before Election Day. Obviously, DeSantis went on to win. He went on to win slightly, but he went on to win. We have to be careful with these head-to-head polls, Tom.
That's why we have Tom here.
Yeah. We absolutely have to be careful with head-to-head polls, certainly national polls, general election polls, and even the state polls at this point in the race, because part of this is it comes down to a binary choice, and the candidates have not been defined, particularly on the Democratic side. I disagree with Brad Parscale on the idea that Trump's going to win this landslide. We're in an evenly divided country. We have been for a long time. It's coming down to 5 or 7, the same 5 or 7 states that it was in 2016. I think it's going to be close, but by no means is Trump out of this, and by no means is it decided right now.
Yeah, it might be a couple different ones, Arizona, maybe a couple other ones. But, panel, thank you. Fiery talk today. When we come back, a superhero comes to the rescue, sort of.